Good morning everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Bhupendra and today I'll be doing a review of the Xbox Series X console. A little bit about myself before we get started. I've been a gamer from a very early age, starting with gaming in the arcades, then moving on to console gaming, owning pretty much every console that was launched in South Africa, all the way from the family computer right down to the PlayStation Pro and the Xbox One. Then moving on to working as a computer programmer and actually programming some games on the side as a hobby as well. So hopefully you'll see some of my games on some of the major platforms in the years to come. I usually buy all of the consoles in a particular generation, well, not right away. Usually I buy one console, I save up, and then I buy a second console as time goes along. Reason for this is because I really enjoy playing the first-party exclusive titles on both consoles, like Gears of War and Forza on the Xbox, God of War, Spider-Man, etc. on the PlayStation side. This time around though, I had to really think hard about which console to buy because it's going to be a while before I can save up enough money to buy the second console. This is because the Xbox Series X actually costs a lot more than the Xbox One in the previous generation. At the moment, the Xbox Series X sells for 12,000 rands, whereas the Xbox One in 2014, I managed to pick it up for around 5,500 rands, so it's more than double the price of the Xbox One. Okay, the reason why I went with the Xbox Series X instead of the PS5 at launch is because my Xbox One prior to this served as a media center. It had a really good built-in media player, as well as sharing many applications with the Windows platform. So applications such as VLC, which is able to play any types of media files which you throw at it, and also an excellent Blu-ray player as well. The second reason is that Microsoft is taking a really consumer-friendly approach, in my opinion, for this generation of consoles. Mainly because all of your controllers, accessories, etc. from the Xbox One function directly on the Series X. And you don't need to spend additional money if you've already invested quite a bit in the Xbox ecosystem prior to this. Alright, looking at the ports which are on the Series X, we have one HDMI port at the back. It comes with an HDMI cable, which on the cable itself says ultra-fast HDMI, so I'm assuming that this is an HDMI 2.1 cable. It comes with one controller and two AA batteries. You'll notice that it does not have an HDMI in port like the Xbox One. It also has the proprietary storage expansion port, which is for the Seagate expansion. It has two USB ports, one Ethernet port, which you can connect a LAN cable to, and it has a place for the power cable to go to. It's pretty cool that they do not have a large power brick this time around, and it just takes a standard power cable into the console. The design of the console itself is pretty cool. I was expecting it to look a lot bigger in person. From the pictures and videos it looked like it was pretty big, but looking at it in person it's actually a lot smaller than I imagined. I actually really like the streamlined design. It's very minimalistic and it looks pretty good next to my TV. When I use it in my other gaming area, where I have a projector connected, it doesn't fit into my TV stand with a vertical alignment, but with a horizontal alignment it fits into the shelves pretty easily. Alright, looking at the controller, you can see that Microsoft has pretty much taken the same design that they had with the Xbox One controller and made a few refinements to it. Okay, firstly, the controller has a more textured feel to it, and it's not as smooth as the Xbox One controller. If I compare the two, the size of the controller is about the same. They've made some refinements to the triggers as well, which have a textured feel as compared to a smooth feel on the Xbox One controllers, and the tension on the rear triggers also feel a little bit different. It seems to have a more smoother feel when pressing the trigger down. In terms of the D-pad, they've gone with a rounded design this time around, very much like the Xbox Elite controllers as compared to the the Plus design that was on the Xbox One controller. For me, this was pretty important because I play a lot of fighting games and I use the D-pad quite a bit. My preference has always been the PlayStation 4 controller, because if you remember with the Xbox 360 controller, they had a really bad D-pad design in my opinion, especially for fighting games, which was not very precise. Having played with this controller for a few days now and trying out games such as Mortal Kombat and Tekken, etc., I find the D-pad to be quite precise. It takes a little bit of getting used to if you're not used to the shape, but overall it's been a very precise and pleasant experience. Okay, the front of the controller also has an additional share button, which is pretty much like how the PS4 controller was in the previous generation. The share button really makes it convenient for you to capture in-game clips or to share screenshots, and it's quite a welcome addition. At the bottom of the controller, it still has the proprietary Xbox headset adapter connector, but it also has a standard 3.5mm headphone jack, which is a really welcome addition. I use a pair of headphones with my PlayStation 4 controller when playing games at night, so as to not wake people up when they're sleeping or to disturb others when they're working. So this is quite a welcome addition. It also means that you could probably use the same pair of headphones with your Xbox controller and your PlayStation 4 controller, or your PlayStation 5 controller if you actually buy the console as well. The Xbox One headset also functions perfectly with the Xbox Series X controller. I've tried it out with a few games and it works fairly well. It's important to note though that the headset does not come packaged with the console like the Xbox One. Okay, firstly, when switching on the console, the thing that really struck me was how quiet this console is. Most of the promotional materials actually mention that this is whisper quiet, and I can attest to that being true. My PS4 Pro in particular used to be very noisy when loading resource-intensive games, but this doesn't seem to be the case with the Series X. Okay, so when you switch the console up, you are prompted to download the Xbox app onto your smartphone, either iOS or Android, and this guides you through the process of setting up your Xbox. All in all, the process was fairly smooth. I was able to transfer my gamer tag from the cloud to the console without any issues. It also maintained most of the settings that I had from the Xbox One and transferred these across to the Series X without any issue. Pairing my Xbox One controller to the Series X was fairly simple as well. And all of the games that I had on my Xbox One, I had transferred to an external USB 3 drive, and installing these onto the Xbox Series X was a breeze. The console immediately picks up the hard drive with all of the games installed, and it was a fairly smooth process. The only game I had an issue with was Gears 5, which gave me an error about the game files being incomplete. I've spoken to a few other friends who also had the same issue with Gears 5, so I had to pretty much re-download the game in order for it to work on the console. I'm not sure if this was because it's trying to download high-resolution textures to take advantage of the Xbox Series X optimizations. If you run your games off the USB 3 hard drive, keep in mind that you will not be able to take advantage of the quick resume feature and also the improved load times. So I transferred the games that I would play most often onto the internal SSD hard drive and immediately noticed a performance boost in terms of load times. It was really a paradigm shift because as a gamer you're very accustomed to staring at load screens for long periods of time, especially with games which have really large PEPs. Whereas now with the SSD, the load times are significantly faster. So this is definitely an improvement over the previous generation. The quick resume feature is also pretty cool because you can load up multiple games and you can switch between games very quickly. I tried this with Mortal Kombat and Gears of War, and I was able to switch mid-round in Mortal Kombat to another game, play a bit of that and come back to Mortal Kombat and resume exactly where you were in that round. So all in all, a pretty cool feature. Using the headphones with the controller actually functions pretty well when playing games. I noticed a bug when using headphones through the controller when playing games, in that the pair of headphones I have, when set to volumes below 75% on the console, made a very loud clipping noise. So I had to set the volume fairly high on the headphones for it to work. But I was able to mitigate the volume by adjusting the balance between the chat and the headset. Okay, for the review, I connected the Xbox to my Samsung LED TV, which I've had for the past 7 or 8 years. It was a fairly good TV and it worked fairly well in the previous generation. It was a 100 Hz full HD TV, and I have not made the jump to 4K as yet. The reason why I haven't made the jump to 4K as yet is because the HDMI 2.1 protocol is still fairly new. There aren't many TVs that have HDMI 2.1 ports on them. With the exception of some of the LG TVs which have 4 HDMI ports, most of the other TVs which do have HDMI 2.1 only have a single HDMI 2.1 port. Okay, this causes an issue if you are planning to buy the PS5 as well as the Xbox Series X. Secondly, most 4K TVs which are out on the market at the moment do not support a 120 Hz refresh rate. So if you want to take full advantage of the Series X and outputting 4K at 120 Hz, it's proving to be a challenge to find a TV which does support this mode. So basically 4K at 120 Hz means that there will be a higher refresh rate on the console, making games more responsive. Not many games support 4K at 120 Hz though, so this is a feature will probably be implemented as the console goes along. It may not be something that's fairly important to you, as most games run at 60 frames per second at the moment, but I'm holding on until I can get a proper 4K TV with multiple HDMI 2.1 ports and which can run 4K at 120 Hz. Yeah, another thing for me to keep in mind is that I use an audiovisual receiver or an AVR to connect my consoles and all of my other media players to first, and then the AVR sends the signal to the TV via HDMI. So if you're planning to go to HDMI 2.1 with 4K, you will also need to update your AVR. At the moment, HDMI 2.1 support, and many of the AVRs do not function correctly. Apparently there's an issue with the chipset that's used for processing the HDMI 2.1 signal, resulting in no picture being output to the screen. Most of the AVR manufacturers are trying to find a solution for this, but I'm not sure if they'll be able to find a software solution or whether they will need to come up with completely new models of AVRs with new hardware to process the HDMI 2.1 signal. Also, like with the TVs, most of the AVRs only have one HDMI 2.1 port, which is also an issue if you're planning to do HDMI 2.1 switching on an AVR. Firstly, the user interface in the console has had some minor adjustments and tweaks compared to the Xbox One interface. So if you're familiar and comfortable with this interface, you'll feel right at home with the console. The interface seems to run a lot smoother and a lot faster as compared to the Xbox One. The Xbox Store is now integrated directly into the user interface, and most tasks performed through the user interface. It's fairly intuitive. The thing that I really enjoyed about the console was that you have the ability to remap the buttons on the controller through the settings as well, which is really a welcome change. Most tasks on the console are performed fairly efficiently. Copying files between the USB 3 to the internal SSD is fairly quick, taking about 10 to 15 minutes to copy about 50 gigs of Mortal Kombat 11 to about 20 to 25 minutes copying Gears of War, which was about 110 gigs to the internal drive. Keep in mind though that the internal SSD only has about 800 gigabytes of usable space. The console, when switching on, immediately needs to install an update, and the update is about 700 megs. SSD can fill up fairly quickly. As the install sizes of games continue to grow, as I mentioned, Gears of War is over 100 gigs. So you should be able to fit about 7 to 8 games on the SSD before the SSD fills up. If you want to expand the storage on the console, you will need to buy the proprietary Seagate expansion card, and this is at the moment very, very expensive. Some importers at the moment are charging up to 7,000 rands just for the expansion. So keep in mind that you will not be able to store a significant amount of games on the internal SSD. However, as a workaround for this, you can copy games from the internal SSD to an external USB 3 drive. However, keep in mind that Xbox Series X enhanced games cannot be played from the USB 3 external drive and have to be played from the SSD. For me, this isn't such a big issue because I don't generally play more than 3 or 4 games at a single time. And once I complete a game, I usually don't play it for quite a long time. So moving these to an external USB 3 or re-downloading the game is not really an issue for me. Speaking of downloading, the game sizes are fairly big, ranging from about 40 to about 150 gigs in most instances. So you'll need a very fast internet line to download games. And also, if you are using a capped internet line, you need to take into account the amount of bandwidth you will consume. So I would really recommend going for an uncapped internet line if you can afford it, if you plan to download and buy digital games. Speaking of digital games, the biggest selling point for me with regards to the Series X was the addition of GamePass. GamePass is basically a digital service where you pay a monthly fee and you have access to a large catalog of games provided by Microsoft, which you can download and play on your console. Pretty much like a Netflix type of service for Xbox games. It has a fairly decent amount of titles already on the catalog, and you get day one access to most of the Microsoft exclusive titles as well. Alright, so is the console really worth the purchase if you, like me, have not made the jump to 4K as yet? Using the console on a full HD TV or a full HD projector, like I am using at the moment, doesn't really yield significant benefits as compared to using the Xbox One, in my opinion. The games run a lot smoother and the load times a lot faster, but in terms of graphical fidelity, you can't really notice much of a difference between the Xbox One and the Series X if you are running a full HD setup like me. If you are moving to 4K, then the console benefits from running the games at a much higher frame rate and a higher resolution. And there are many games which are now getting enhancements for the Series X, which would make the games render a lot better and will also make the games run a lot smoother. So if you have a setup like mine where you're running a full HD TV instead of 4K TV, then I don't really see a major reason to upgrade at this specific point in time. There aren't any games that take advantage of the console to its full potential as yet, but these will probably come in the next 6 to 7 months or so as they're currently in development. So in my opinion, there isn't really a killer app at this point in time which compels you to buy a Series X if you already have an Xbox One X or an Xbox. That being said, if you are in the market for a console or already have a 4K TV, I can strongly recommend this console, as the build quality of the console and the controller really feels like a premier product. Add to the equation the addition of Game Pass with a solid library of games, and you have an unbeatable combination of software and hardware, which I think will serve you for many years to come. Thank you very much for watching this review on my channel. If you would like more content like this in future, remember to click on the subscribe button below. Until next time, take care and happy gaming.